As I mentioned, coming up this week, a lot of activity on Capitol Hill, primarily surrounding the issue of money. The Senate discussion of the debt ceiling is underway as a government shutdown looms. And in the next 30 minutes, the Senate is scheduled to take a procedural vote on a House-passed measure to both continue funding the government through December 3rd and suspend the limit on the amount of debt the U.S. can amass into December 2022. The measure is expected to fail in the Senate due to GOP opposition. So what's ahead? Well, joining me now to talk more about this is Congressman Ron Estes. He is a member of the House Committee on Ways and Means, and he represents the 4th Congressional District of Kansas. Congressman Estes, welcome back to the program.
Well, great. Thank you.
So, big week on Capitol Hill for the Democrats. A lot of Joe Biden's big plans, $3.5 trillion in human infrastructure, $1.5 trillion in real infrastructure, kind of hangs in the balance as to what they can accomplish this week, does it not?
Yeah, it really is. They're trying to see how much money they can spend in so many different ways. And we need to make sure that we really are calling and describing what they're really talking about. I mean, this $3.5 trillion in extra spending actually is now up to $4.3 trillion because 6 of the 13 committees decided they wanted to spend more than what they were allowed to. And the $1.2 trillion in what's being called infrastructure that came out of the Senate, basically that was double what had been proposed out of the House Democrats, which obviously had more infrastructure. Now we do have to do infrastructure. It's important for us as a country. We've got to work on roads and bridges and waterways, but we don't need to be throwing so much money around, and that's being done right now. One of the things they're waiting on right now, they're having trouble figuring out how to get the votes to pass that, primarily because more people want spending more even than what's in those bills already.
Yeah, the trouble they're having in getting the votes is among Democrats. It's not Republicans, because Republicans are opposed to these huge spending bills. Now, Congressman, this is on top of normal spending, is it not?
Exactly. I mean, we already spend, 4.6, $4.7 trillion every year. By the time you look at Social Security and Medicare and all the spending there, which is more than we bring in taxes anyway. And then you there were some legitimate extra spending added with COVID. We had to have some funding a year and a half ago to develop the vaccines through Operation Warp Speed and help have the Paycheck Protection Program so that employees could be still connected with their employer. But now they're just wanting to add more and more on top of the regular spending, and we can't afford it. As you mentioned earlier, we're already at $28 trillion in debt, and just to add this on top of what's already being added. Just thinking back if this bill passed and they spend what would be amount over $5.5 trillion, they will have spent in the last 18 months more than what every American earns in 1 year. And so we've got to rein this spending in.
As you pointed out, and we won't get into the details, but there are some very valid initiatives in the infrastructure plan, but it goes beyond the essentials, the roads, the bridges, the power grid, actually down in the South where they're putting more of this underground so it's not so susceptible to the storm. Some of that makes perfect sense and it's needed. But as you said, there's a lot more on top of this. Now, when you get to the $3.5 trillion human infrastructure, as Nancy Pelosi likes to call it, there's a price tag associated with this. And this is what's making some of the Democrats, some of them squeamish, because we're talking about the corporate tax rate going from 21% to 26.5%. For those making more than $5 million a year. These are businesses, small businesses that employ people. And then individual rates going from 37 to 39, almost 40%. That's just federal. I mean, we're reaching a point where it's not going to pay people to make money, earn incomes, and create jobs.
Yeah, you're really right. And as part of this spending, they're adding those taxes that you talked about. But in reality, those taxes won't pay for all of the spending that's being included. And in the meantime, we're going to make the United States less competitive the way it was before 2017 when we passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And we'll get back to the point where our tax rates are so much higher than other countries around the world that businesses will again start taking the jobs overseas and opening up their plants and their operations outside the United States, and we won't have jobs for American workers. And one of the things that's really stood out in my mind since we passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017, there hasn't been a single company in the United States that went through the inversion process, basically to rename themselves as a corporation that's set up outside the United States.
Well, stand by. It'll be happening pretty soon, I think, if this is successful. You mentioned the price tag. I want to play a clip of President Biden on Friday doing a Q&A. He was asked about the social spending in this bill and who was going to pay for it. Play clip number 2, please.
We talk about price tags. It is zero price tag on the debt. We're going to pay for everything we spend. So it's not, people understandably, well, it started off at 6 trillion, now it's 3.5 trillion, now is it going to be 2.9? It's going to be zero.
Congressman?
Well, that's just not true. I mean, we had the bill go through Ways and Means Committee, and you look at in addition to starting out at 3.5 trillion, it's now ballooned up to 4.3 trillion. There were about 2.1 trillion in tax increases tied to that. And at the end of the day, it's not really spending to help people that really need it. If you make $800,000 and you want to buy a Tesla, a family in California can do that and get $12,500 back. That's part of the spending that's in this bill. If you make $500,000 and you're a family in a state like Oklahoma or middle part of the country, you actually can get $6,000 in credits towards an Obamacare policy. So basically, they're throwing a lot of money all around the country trying to justify it as it's helping low-income folks, and really it's just spending a lot of money.
Well, it's a transfer of wealth, and it's putting money into the government's hands, and they take their share of it before they put it back out into the economy. But Nancy Pelosi saying something very similar yesterday. She was on ABC News this week with George Stephanopoulos, and this is what she had to say about the spending package. Clip 3, please.
This will be paid for. So when some say, oh, well, what about inflation? It will be paid for. And that's the beauty of it, by having those in our economy and society who have not paid their fair share, paying their fair share. So again, the Senate and the House, those who are not in full agreement with the president's rate, let's see what our value, let's not talk about numbers and dollars, let's talk about values.
I can see why they don't want to talk about dollars.
Exactly. They don't want to talk about the dollars because there's so many of them in it that they're just throwing around. And if she thinks it's going to be paid for, then why is she concerned about the debt ceiling and raising that? Because you actually have to raise the debt ceiling to raise the money to pay for all of this spending.
So, Congressman Estes, I know you're right in the center of this and a lot of dynamics, but what do you think is going to unfold this week?
I think it's going to be a very messy week. There's a couple things that we need to accomplish. One, we really need to get infrastructure bill moving forward. The highway bill, what was traditionally called the highway bill, expires. The authorization for that expires this week. So it'd be great if we could pass something along those lines. I think it'd be a great idea. So let's pass the parts that we agree with. Let's focus on roads and bridges, focus on waterways, broadband, electric grid, and get that passed. The other thing that has to happen this week is pass appropriations for next year's spending. Our fiscal year starts October 1st, and right now we don't have funding to fund the government starting on Friday. And all of this goes back to they've been focusing on how do we spend trillions and trillions of more dollars instead of focusing on what they really need to do, which is fund the government, make sure it operates correctly and provides the services that we need, and not add all these extra add-ons and extra spending programs. So I think it's going to be convoluted. I think we'll have some late nights trying to work through votes on getting past what we need to get past at the same time when they're trying to focus on getting this now 4.3 trillion and the 1.2 trillion infrastructure passed, and I think it's going to be messy week all week long.
Yep, and right in the middle of it, you got the congressional baseball game taking place. So Going to be an interesting week. Congressman Ron Estes, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, great. I appreciate it. It's good to be on again.